Hey everyone, time for another book review. So today we're going to summarize the book of Genesis in under 5 minutes. That's coming up next on The Beat. Hey everyone, my name is Alan Parr. Thank you all so much for tuning into The Beat. Today I want to give you a quick but detailed overview of the book of Genesis, and I want to do so by giving you an outline of the main people and events in the book of Genesis, and then finish by giving you some awesome practical lessons that we can learn from this book. So the book of Genesis breaks down into two primary sections. First of all, you have chapters 1 through 11, where God is dealing with humanity and mankind as a whole. And then second of all, you have chapters 12 through 50, where God zooms in on the life of one man named Abraham and his family. And so in the first two chapters, we have the story of creation. It's actually interesting how God created. In the first 3 days, he created spaces for things like the sky and the land and the sea. And then in the last 3 days, he actually put things like birds and fish and mankind in those spaces. But then in chapter 3, everything went downhill because Adam and Eve chose to mess everything up by eating from the very tree that God said they should not eat from. Then in chapter 6, the next major event is the flood. And so God says, man, I can see where this is going. Wickedness is running rampant across the face of the earth. And so I'm going to wipe out mankind. And I'm going to start all over again with a man named Noah. And then finally in chapter 11, you have the story of Babel. And this is where the people say, you know what, I'm going to make a name for myself and build a tower that reaches up to the heavens. But if you can remember, back in Genesis chapter 1, God said, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. And so up to this point, all the people had kind of congregated in one city. And God says, you know, I'm going to mess up your plans. I'm going to send different languages down to confuse you, forcing you to spread out and fill the earth. So as I said earlier, in chapter 12, the book now makes a shift, and instead of focusing on God's dealing with mankind, he zooms in on the life of one man named Abraham. And God says, hey, I want to begin the process of reconciling and restoring that relationship that I had with mankind in the Garden of Eden. So God comes to Abraham and says, Abraham, I want to make a covenant with you. And so I'm going to bless you. I'm going to give you land. I'm going to give you as many descendants as the stars are in the sky. I want you to be a light in the midst of the darkness that surrounds you, so that when I bless you so much, the nations around you will be attracted to you, which will give you the opportunity to point them to me. And so Abraham had two sons. One was named Ishmael, one was named Isaac, but the promise went through Isaac. And then Isaac had two sons. One was named Jacob, the other was Esau, but the promise went through Jacob. And Jacob had 12 sons, and one of them was Joseph. And Joseph happened to be his favorite son because he was born to him in his old age, but also because he was born to him through his favorite wife named Rachel. So the book ends where there is a famine that spreads across the face of the earth, and the only food on the face of the earth is in Egypt, to which Joseph has total control over distributing this food to whoever he pleases. And so Joseph's family that's back in Canaan finds out that there is food in Egypt, and so they move their family to Egypt to get food, and as a result, that's how the Jewish nation moved to Egypt. And so now I just want to highlight 4 practical lessons that we can learn from the book of Genesis. And the first comes from creation. And so creation reminds us that God can take the things that we believe are nothing and create something beautiful from it. The second lesson that we can learn is that even though God forgives, there are always consequences to our sins. So if you notice, after Adam and Eve sinned, they began to feel ashamed around each other. They felt guilty before God. They began hiding from God. They had fear of God. They began to blame one another, and then they ended up trying to make up for their sins by doing good works such as covering themselves with fig leaves. The third lesson here is a lesson about grace. I want you to notice that the fig leaves that Adam and Eve used to cover themselves was not good enough in God's sight. And so what God does is he goes and takes an innocent animal and kills that animal and takes the skins from that animal and clothes them himself. This teaches us that even though Adam and Eve were guilty and deserved punishment from God, God chose something that was innocent and decided to take his punishment out on that instead, which is a foreshadowing of what he was going to do for us through Jesus Christ on the cross. The final lesson is to make sure that you always connect your pain to your purpose. You know, Joseph could have remained bitter at his brothers for selling him into slavery, but then when he got older in life, he was able to look back and see why God allowed him to go through that situation. At the end of the book, he says, you know what? You guys intended it for evil, but God intended it for my good. If you haven't done so already, I would love it if you would subscribe. Check out some of the other videos on this channel. As always, you can download the notes in the description box below. I'll leave a link. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you next time on The Beat.